Good evening, sleepy traveler. Tonight, we journey back in time not to the roar of battle or the clamor of kings, but to a quieter, more shadowed corner of history. We'll explore a time when the world was both exquisitely beautiful and terribly vulnerable, and when a unique, almost mythical figure emerged from the twilight to confront an unseen terror. Imagine, if you will, the Europe of the late medieval era, slowly, gently awakening into the vibrant dawn of the Renaissance. Picture the soft, morning light stretching across rolling hills, illuminating fields of golden wheat and the distant spires of bustling cities. This was a time of extraordinary change, a period when human spirit seemed to unfurl like a blossoming flower. Great cathedrals, reaching towards the heavens, were adorned with intricate carvings, whispering tales of devotion. Artists, with brushes dipped in dreams, began to capture the human form with a breathtaking realism, bringing marble to life and infusing canvases with a warmth that still glows centuries later. Think of the quiet hum of workshops in Florence, where apprentices learned the secrets of their craft, shaping clay, polishing silver, or grinding pigments into brilliant hues. Imagine the libraries, slowly filling with rediscovered texts, where scholars pored over ancient philosophies, their candles casting dancing shadows on forgotten wisdom. It was an age of discovery, of invention, of daring voyages across uncharted seas. The world felt vast, full of possibility, a tapestry woven with threads of innovation and beauty. People were rediscovering the joy of human potential, the richness of earthly life, after long centuries, focused on the hereafter. Yet, beneath this gilded surface, like the deepest currents of a hidden river, lay a profound vulnerability. For all their burgeoning knowledge, for all their artistic genius, the people of this age lived in a delicate balance with forces they barely understood. The grand cities, those centers of commerce and culture, were also places where life intertwined closely, where the breath of one person mingled easily with another. Sanitation, as we know it today, was an unimagined concept. Streets could be narrow and crowded, filled with the scents of spices and sweat, of baking bread and refuse. It was a world where remedies were often a blend of ancient herbal lore, whispered prayers, and practices rooted in astrology or even pure superstition. The delicate dance of the human body, its intricate mechanisms, remained largely a mystery. Sickness was often attributed to imbalances of humors, to divine displeasure, or to malevolent spirits. There was a quiet, underlying acceptance of life's fragility, a knowledge that one's path could be cut short by a sudden fever, a persistent cough, or a festering wound. Death was not a distant abstraction. It was a familiar shadow, ever present at the edges of life, sometimes even a guest within the home. And then there was the unseen threat. Imagine a whisper carried on the wind from distant lands, growing louder with each passing day. A story, at first, of a strange affliction sweeping through far-off kingdoms, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and silence. It wasn't an invading army with clashing swords and war cries, nor a roaring fire that consumed all in its path. This was something far more insidious, more terrifying in its invisibility. It was a silent tide, rising inexorably, crossing borders, leaping oceans, carried by merchants on their ships, by travelers on their roads, by the very air they breathed. Could you feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere? The way the laughter in the taverns might grow a little quieter, the way conversations in the market squares might turn to hushed tones full of rumor and apprehension. This unseen enemy had no face, no banner, no discernible form. It simply was. It manifested as a sudden fever, a chilling cough, excruciating pain, and then those terrible swellings, the buboes, that gave it its dreaded name, the Black Death, or simply the plague. It stole into villages and walled cities alike, not with a thunderous declaration, but with the quiet, chilling certainty of a thief in the night. One day, a family would be vibrant, alive with the everyday rhythm of their lives. The next, a chill would descend, a cough would echo, and the warmth would begin to fade, leaving behind a profound emptiness. What if the very breath of a loved one could become a harbinger of doom? What if the simple act of touch, a comforting hand, could transmit an invisible poison? The world, for all its burgeoning beauty and intellectual awakening, began to hold its breath. The fragile peace, built on the foundations of human endeavor, felt suddenly poised on the brink of shattering. The vibrant colors of the Renaissance seemed to dull slightly, muted by an encroaching shadow. Artists might still paint, but perhaps with a new, somber introspection. Scholars might still study, but with a heightened awareness of life's fleeting nature. The joyous celebrations, the bustling markets, the very pulse of daily life began to take on a hesitant, watchful quality. Every cough, every fever, every unexplained ache became a source of profound dread. Doors that once stood open, in welcome, might now be cautiously bolted. Faces that once smiled freely might now be veiled in suspicion or fear. The very fabric of society, woven so tightly through community and connection, began to fray under the strain of this invisible assault. In this climate of quiet dread, where prayers seemed to dissipate into the vastness of the heavens and traditional remedies proved utterly powerless, a desperate need arose. A need for someone, anyone, to stand against the tide. A need for a guardian, however strange, however unlikely, to venture into the heart of the darkness when all others fled. A figure who would walk where angels feared to tread, facing down the unseen enemy with whatever tools, however crude, they possessed. This profound vulnerability, this pervasive sense of an invisible threat, created a void. And into that void, from the quiet desperation of a world holding its breath, a new kind of healer, a new kind of watchman, would slowly begin to emerge, a figure cloaked in mystery, with an outline as stark as a shadow against the dying light of an age. And so, in the deepening shadows of that profound vulnerability, a new archetype began to take form, not born of ancient guilds or hallowed universities, but forged in the crucible of communal despair. These were not the physicians of old, learned men who consulted dusty tomes and spoke in Latinate phrases from the safety of their studies. No, these were often men of lesser training, sometimes even former apothecaries or barbers, called upon by desperate city councils when the true healers had either fallen ill themselves, fled in terror, or simply run out of answers. They were, in essence, municipal employees, hired specifically to confront the encroaching darkness, to bear witness to the unbearable, and to offer whatever solace or remedy their limited knowledge could provide. Imagine the quiet, almost hesitant discussions in the candlelit chambers of a city hall, the hushed voices of weary aldermen and magistrates, debating who would dare undertake such a grim task, who would willingly step into the homes of the dying, to breathe the air heavy with sickness, to touch the flesh afflicted by an invisible poison. It was a role that promised little glory and much peril, a solitary vigil against an enemy that seemed to defy all understanding. And from these desperate needs, slowly, the figure of the plague doctor began to materialize, a silent sentinel against the tide of sorrow. What if, in their very emergence, they became a living symbol of an age grappling with the inexplicable? Their most enduring image, the one that still haunts our dreams and whispers through the corridors of history, is that of their peculiar attire. Picture it, a heavy, often dark, waxed canvas or leather coat, extending from neck to ankle, a formidable barrier against the unknown. Beneath it, perhaps, breeches and a shirt, but the outer shell was key. Could it be that the very weight of these garments was meant to instill a sense of protection, a tangible defiance against the ethereal contagion? Then, the gloves, thick and gauntleted, protecting the hands that would touch the afflicted, and the boots, sturdy and tall, to guard against anything that might lie unseen on the cobblestones. But it is the head, the masked visage, that truly captures the imagination. A haunting silhouette against a dying world. A wide-brimmed hat, often made of leather, perhaps to signify their medical profession, or simply to add another layer of separation from the contaminated air. And then, the mask itself. Oh, the mask. It was not merely a covering, but a deliberate construction, designed with a specific, if ultimately flawed, purpose. Imagine a long, bird-like beak protruding from the face, often filled with potent aromatics, dried flowers, herbs like mint and myrrh, spices, camphor, or even sponges soaked in vinegar. The belief was that the plague was spread by miasma, a noxious, foul-smelling air. By filling the beak with sweet-smelling substances, they hoped to filter out the poisoned breath, to create a perfumed sanctuary for their own lungs, a small, breathable haven in a world suffocating from dread. What a fragile hope, to believe that a pleasant scent could ward off such a devastating enemy. And the eyes, peering out from beneath the hat, through clear glass inserts in the mask, often dark and unblinking, like the eyes of a bird of prey. They were meant to see, to observe, but perhaps also to shield the wearer from the full horror of what they witnessed, to maintain a professional distance, however thin. This entire ensemble was not merely clothing, it was a ritualistic armor, a defiant declaration against an invisible foe. It was both deeply practical for its time and profoundly symbolic, a merging of the scientific understanding of the era with a desperate, almost magical attempt at protection. Could you imagine the sight of such a figure emerging from the early morning mist, walking down a deserted street towards a house marked with a red cross, or a bundle of straw, the grim sign of affliction? The soft rustle of their waxed coat, the steady thud of their boots, the silent, watchful presence of that bird-like mask. It must have been a terrifying, yet perhaps also a strangely comforting, sight for those who awaited them. A harbinger of death, yes, but also a glimmer of hope, however faint, that someone, anyone, was willing to confront the darkness. Their duties were as grim as their appearance. They were often tasked, not with healing in the modern sense, but with simply bearing witness. They would enter homes where entire families lay afflicted, taking note of symptoms, recording the names of the dead, and sometimes even performing autopsies in an attempt to understand the disease. A brave, if often futile act in an age of limited anatomical knowledge. They were the ones who would count the fallen, who would document the spread, providing the only official record of the plague's relentless march. Imagine the weight of that ledger, filled day after day with names, each entry a life extinguished, a family broken. Their treatments were as varied as they were ineffective. They might apply poultices of herbs, leeches for bloodletting, a common practice believed to balance the body's humors, or even attempt to lance the dreaded bobos, those painful, swollen lymph nodes that were the hallmark of the disease. These were often excruciating procedures, offering little relief and sometimes even hastening the end. They carried with them a long wooden staff, not for walking, but for examining the sick without direct touch, or for pointing out the infected to others, maintaining a vital, if symbolic, distance. What if this staff, this simple stick of wood, became an extension of their very will, a fragile barrier between life and death? To be a plague doctor was to live in a world apart. They were often quarantined, living in isolation from their own families, to prevent further spread. They were paid, sometimes handsomely, but their currency was often loneliness and the constant specter of death. Imagine the psychological toll, day after day, week after week, entering homes filled with suffering, listening to the pleas of the dying, witnessing the raw agony of grief. They became figures of both desperate necessity and profound fear, revered for their courage, but shunned for their constant proximity to contagion. Children might whisper their names in hushed tones, pointing from behind curtained windows, while adults might offer a hasty prayer as they passed. They were the ones who saw the true face of the plague, not as an abstract rumor, but as a living, breathing horror. They saw the fear in the eyes of the healthy, the pain in the faces of the sick, and the quiet resignation of the dying. They were witnesses to the breakdown of social order, to the abandonment of the sick by their loved ones, and to the desperate measures people took to survive. Yet they also witnessed acts of extraordinary courage, of quiet devotion, and of an enduring human spirit that refused to be extinguished even in the darkest hours. And so, the plague doctor, with their strange, bird-like mask and their heavy cloak, became an indelible part of the tapestry of that era. Not just a historical figure, but almost a mythical one, an embodiment of humanity's struggle against an unseen enemy. They walked the line between the living and the dying, a bridge across the chasm of sickness, a silent, watchful presence in the heart of a world holding its breath. Their tools were crude, their understanding limited, but their courage, however desperate, was undeniable. They were a testament to the human need to confront the darkness, even when armed with little more than a prayer and a peculiar mask. And their image, etched into the collective memory of humanity, continues to whisper tales of an age when the boundaries between life and death, between fear and hope, were terribly, exquisitely thin. The grand public squares, where festivals once erupted in joyous song and dance, would become silent, save for the whisper of the wind or the distant, mournful chime of a church bell tolling for yet another departed soul. What if the silence itself became a kind of sound, a heavy, oppressive blanket muffling the world? The human orchestra of daily life, the clatter of hooves, the cries of vendors, the murmur of gossiping neighbors would fade, replaced by a profound, unsettling stillness. Could you picture the windows of homes, once flung open to catch the summer breeze, now shuttered tight, like eyes squeezed shut against a terrifying vision? Behind these closed doors, families huddled, their lives reduced to a desperate, watchful waiting. Every sneeze, every cough, every faint ache would send shivers of icy fear through the heart. The warmth of human connection, the very essence of community, was paradoxically becoming a source of danger, a pathway for the invisible enemy to claim another victim. Trust, that delicate thread that binds us, began to fray, replaced by suspicion in the chilling imperative of self-preservation. Yet, even in this profound desolation, the human spirit, like a tenacious wildflower pushing through cracked pavement, found ways to persist. Perhaps it was in the quiet, heroic acts of a neighbor leaving food on a stricken family's doorstep, or a priest, defying all fear, offering final rites to the dying. What if, amidst the overwhelming darkness, these small acts of courage and compassion glowed with an almost supernatural intensity, tiny beacons in a sea of despair? The rituals of life, though warped by fear, continued in altered forms. Funerals, once grand communal events, became hurried, solitary affairs, the dead often buried in mass graves outside the city walls, their names perhaps whispered only by the wind. But even in this hurried anonymity, there was a desperate attempt to honor, to remember, to acknowledge the passing of a soul. Could it be that in the very act of burying the dead, of marking their passing, humanity was also burying its fear, hoping to lay it to rest with the departed? And through these shadowed streets, against this backdrop of hushed horror and quiet resilience, the plague doctor continued their solitary vigil. They were the ones who saw it all, the full spectrum of human response to the abyss. They witnessed the raw, animalistic fear that could turn people against their own kin, the desperate pleas for a miracle, and the serene acceptance that sometimes settled upon the faces of the dying. Their bird-like masks, which shielded them from the perceived miasma, also offered a strange kind of anonymity, allowing them to move through the deepest sorrows without their own emotions betraying them. Imagine the weight of the stories they carried, the echoes of last breaths, the silent tears of mourners, the lingering scent of illness that clung to their waxed coats long after they had left a house of sorrow. They were the unchosen historians of a forgotten catastrophe, their memories filled with faces, symptoms, and the precise, chilling geography of despair. What if, beneath the stoic facade of their masks, a profound weariness settled into their souls, a quiet grief for a world that seemed to be unraveling before their very eyes? Their wooden staff, meant to keep a safe distance, became more than just a tool. It was an extension of their will, a silent pointer to the invisible enemy, a rhythmic tap on the cobblestones, announcing their approach. For some, it was a terrifying omen. For others, a symbol of desperate, if distant, hope. It was a tangible link between the living and the dying, a fragile bridge across the chasm of contagion. Could it be that the very sound of that staff, echoing in the deserted streets, was a lullaby of sorts, a grim but constant reminder that even in the face of oblivion, someone was still watching, still striving, still counting the cost? The observations made by these humble, often uncelebrated practitioners, though steeped in the flawed understanding of their era, laid some of the earliest, tentative groundwork for future medical thought. They meticulously recorded symptoms, charting the progression of the disease, even if their conclusions were often far from the truth. They noticed patterns, however faint, in the way the illness spread, the types of people it affected, and the terrifying speed with which it claimed its victims. These were the first, crude whispers of epidemiology, the very nascent stirrings of a scientific approach to public health, born not in grand academies, but in the grim, practical necessity of a world under siege. What if, in their very helplessness, they sparked a deeper human curiosity, a relentless drive to understand the invisible forces that govern our lives? The plague itself, in its brutal efficiency, forced humanity to confront its own biological vulnerability, to question old beliefs, and to seek new explanations. The age of miasma theory would eventually give way to the discovery of microscopic enemies, but the relentless, systematic observation of the plague doctors, however imperfect, was a step on that long, winding path. As the waves of plague eventually receded, leaving behind a scarred but not broken landscape, the image of the plague doctor did not vanish. Instead, it became an enduring symbol, not just of death, but of humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. It whispered of an age when courage was measured not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, solitary walk towards a house of sickness. It spoke of the profound, often tragic limitations of human knowledge, but also of the unyielding spirit to learn, to adapt, to confront the darkness, even when armed with little more than a peculiar mask and a desperate hope. The silence of the deserted cities eventually gave way to a hesitant return of life. The shutters opened, the market squares slowly filled, and the laughter of children, though perhaps a little more subdued, began to echo once more. But the world was irrevocably changed. A generation had witnessed death on an unimaginable scale, a collective trauma that would ripple through art, literature, and philosophy for centuries to come. The delicate balance between life and death had been tipped, revealing a profound fragility that would forever alter humanity's perception of its place in the grand tapestry of existence. The memory of the plague doctor, however, continued to drift through the collective consciousness, a ghost of a guardian, a silent testament to a time when an invisible enemy forced humanity to don a strange bird-like mask and confront the abyss. Their story, woven into the very fabric of history, reminds us of the profound power of an unseen threat and the quiet, enduring strength of those who dared to face it, a strength that echoes even in the quiet hum of our own slumbering world. For centuries, the world continued to breathe, to mend, to forget some of the sharpest edges of that profound trauma. Yet the echoes of the plague, and of those who walked its shadowed paths, remain. Imagine the slow unfurling of life again, like tender green shoots pushing through scorched earth after a devastating fire. The cities, once hushed and fearful, gradually found their voice. The markets hummed once more. The artisans returned to their crafts, and the laughter of children, perhaps a little more precious now, once again filled the air. But the world was not the same. It never truly is. After such a profound turning point, could it be that the very fabric of society, stretched and torn by the plague's relentless grip, had been rewoven with new threads? The vast, unimaginable loss of life, perhaps a third or even half of Europe's population, left gaping holes in families, in communities, in the very structure of the medieval world. The fields once tended by many hands might now lie fallow or be worked by fewer, more valued laborers. The old feudal systems which had bound people to the land began to loosen their hold, as the scarcity of workers gave rise to new opportunities, new freedoms, however small. What if, in the very act of dying, the plague had inadvertently sown the seeds of a new social order, pushing humanity towards a different future? Think of the quiet, almost subconscious, shifts in the human heart. The pervasive presence of death had forced people to confront their own mortality with an intensity rarely seen before. This awareness, this deep understanding of life's fleeting nature, seeped into the art, the literature, and the very soul of the Renaissance that followed. Where once there was an unwavering focus on the spiritual hereafter, there began to be a renewed appreciation for the beauty and richness of earthly life, a desire to live fully, to create, to explore. Could it be that the shadow of the plague, paradoxically, illuminated the preciousness of human existence, urging humanity to seize the day with a newfound urgency? The vibrant colors of a Botticelli, the profound humanity of a Michelangelo, the adventurous spirit of explorers charting unknown waters, were these not, in some quiet way, a response to the great darkness that had passed? Even faith, that bedrock of medieval life, was subtly reshaped. How could such suffering be reconciled with a benevolent God? Questions once whispered in the dark corners of the soul began to surface, leading to new spiritual movements, to a deeper, more personal search for meaning. The plague doctors, who had stood between the living and the dying when prayers seemed to fail, became a quiet testament to humanity's need for practical intervention. Alongside spiritual solace, they were a bridge, however fragile, between the old world of unquestioning faith and a nascent future of inquiry and empirical observation. In the image of the plague doctor itself, it did not fade with the receding tide of the disease. Instead, it became etched into the collective memory, evolving into a potent symbol. Imagine it, not just a historical figure, but an archetype, a silent sentinel who guarded the threshold between worlds. The peculiar mask, with its long bird-like beak, became an iconic silhouette against the backdrop of an age grappling with the inexplicable. It was a figure that evoked both dread and a strange primal fascination. Could you picture it appearing in the masquerades and carnivals of later centuries? Its stark, enigmatic form, a chilling reminder of mortality, even amidst revelry. In the playful darkness of Venice, the Medico della Peste mask would become a popular choice, a playful yet profound acknowledgement of death's ever-present shadow, transformed into a costume for celebration. What if, in donning that mask, people were not merely remembering the plague, but also symbolically conquering their fear, transforming horror into a theatrical whisper? It became a character in folklore, a presence in stories, a silent observer in the grand theater of human experience. The very strangeness of its appearance made it unforgettable, a blend of the macabre and the mysterious, a visual shorthand for a time when an invisible enemy stalked the land. Yet, beyond the symbolism, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift was also taking place in the realm of medicine. The desperate, often futile, efforts of the plague doctors, Their meticulous if misguided observations were not entirely in vain. They were, in their own way, pioneers. They recorded symptoms, they documented the spread, they observed the impact of quarantine, however rudimentary, while their understanding of miasma was incorrect. The idea that disease was transmitted, that there was something in the environment that made people sick, was a crucial step. Think of it as a tiny, persistent drip of water on a stone, slowly, over centuries, beginning to wear it down. The plague forced doctors to look more closely, to question old dogmas, to seek pattern. The very helplessness in the face of such a devastating illness ignited a deeper human curiosity, a relentless drive to understand the invisible forces that govern our lives. What if the plague doctor, in their very failure to cure, inadvertently laid the intellectual groundwork for those who would eventually succeed? Their efforts, however crude, contributed to the slow, meandering path towards a more systematic approach to disease. The concepts of isolation and quarantine, practiced in desperation during the plague years, evolved and refined over time. The idea of public health, of communal measures to prevent the spread of illness, began to take hesitant root, even if the underlying scientific reasons were still centuries away from being understood. Cities, scarred by the plague, began to consider their waste, their water, their burial practices, with a new, if still limited, awareness. It was not a sudden revolution, but a gradual, quiet awakening, fueled by the memory of terrible suffering. The mask itself, with its perfumed beak, was a flawed attempt at protection, but it represented a deep-seated human impulse to create barriers, to shield oneself from the unseen. This ancient intuition, however unscientific in its initial form, would eventually find its true scientific expression. The journey from the belief in noxious miasmas to the discovery of microscopic enemies, bacteria, and viruses, was a long and winding one, spanning centuries of scientific endeavor. It would require the invention of the microscope, the patient work of countless scientists, and a profound shift in understanding the very nature of life and disease. But the seed of that quest, the desperate need to understand and to protect, was sown in the terrifying silence of plague-ridden streets. Under the watchful, glass-eyed gaze of the bird-like mask, the plague doctor's peculiar attire, for all its anachronistic charm, was a precursor, a distant ancestor, to the sophisticated protective gear worn by medical professionals today. What if the very act of constructing that mask, however imperfectly, was a primal, human declaration? We will not face this unseen enemy, unarmed. And so, the quiet hum of our modern world, with its advancements in medicine and understanding, still carries the faint echo of that ancient struggle. The image of the plague doctor remains, not just as a relic of a bygone era, but as a timeless reminder of humanity's enduring vulnerability, its persistent courage, and its relentless quest for knowledge in the face of the unknown. It whispers of the long journey from fear and superstition to understanding and control, a journey that is far from over. Could it be that the deepest lesson of the plague doctor's story is not just about the specific horrors of an ancient disease, but about the timeless human condition, the need to confront the shadows, to seek solace, to strive for understanding, even when the path is unclear and the enemy invisible, the quiet determination that surfaces when all seems lost, the resilience that allows humanity to rebuild and to learn, even from its most devastating losses. As we drift towards sleep, let us remember that long, slow journey and the silent watchers who helped guide humanity through its darkest hours, a journey that continues, even in our dreams, as the stars slowly turn above us, a journey that continues, even in our dreams, as the stars slowly turn above us, and as those stars wheel silently across the velvet canvas of the night, so too did humanity's understanding of the invisible world slowly, patiently turn, like a vast, cosmic clock. The plague receded, Yes, its most terrifying grip loosened, but the memory of an unseen enemy, of a silent killer carried on the air, lingered like a phantom limb, an ache in the collective soul. For centuries that followed, the world grappled with other mysterious scourges, fevers that swept through villages like malevolent whispers, coughs that stole the breath of young and old, ailments that defied explanation and left healers baffled. The plague doctor, with their perfumed beak, remained a potent symbol of a deep human intuition that something unseen, something other was at play. But what was it? And how could it truly be fought when it had no discernible form, no visible face? Imagine the patient, often solitary work of countless minds across generations, slowly, painstakingly chipping away at the great ancient wall of the unknown. Think of alchemists, not merely seeking to turn lead into gold, but experimenting in shadowed workshops, observing the reactions of herbs and tinctures however crude their understanding. Picture early anatomists with trembling hands and sharp tools, carefully dissecting bodies, trying to map the intricate wonders of the human form, pushing against ancient taboos and the fear of the sacred. Each tiny observation, each whispered question, was a flicker of light in the vast darkness, a tentative, often dangerous, step on that long, winding path towards true understanding. What if every failed remedy, every unanswered prayer, was not a sign of futility, but simply a signpost guiding humanity in a slightly different direction, urging a deeper, more rigorous inquiry? The pursuit of knowledge, like a slow-burning ember, continued to glow. From the meticulous documentation of symptoms by the plague doctors, however flawed their interpretations, came the first seeds of empirical observation. The necessity of quarantine, born of desperate isolation, began to hint at the principle of contagion, the idea that something transmissible was at work. But still, the enemy remained invisible, a ghost in the machine of life. Humanity felt its effects, witnessed its devastation, but could not see it. Could you feel the frustration, the yearning for clarity that must have haunted those early seekers of truth, living in a world perpetually threatened by shadows? Then a new kind of eye began to emerge, offering not just insight, but a veritable window into a previously unimagined cosmos. A curved piece of glass, perhaps at first a simple magnifying lens used by spectacle makers, then two, then three, arranged with cunning precision in a tube of brass or wood. The first crude microscopes, those wondrous devices born from relentless curiosity and painstaking craft, offered humanity an unprecedented glimpse into a world previously utterly hidden. Imagine the profound awe, the sheer, breathtaking wonder of the first person to peer through such a lens and see, not empty space, but a swirling, teeming universe in a single drop of water, on the edge of a leaf, or within a speck of dust from a common household. What if, for centuries, we had been living amidst an entire, vibrant, intricate cosmos, completely oblivious to its incessant dance, its vital, often deadly, role in the very fabric of life and death? This was the true revelation, the quiet, profound overturning of centuries of belief. The miasma, the noxious, foul-smelling air so feared by the plague doctors, began to yield its secrets, not as an ethereal scent, but as a host for living, breathing entities. For within those unseen swirling motes, those tiny, elegant forms, those animalcules as they were first called, lay the answers. It wasn't the smell itself that sickened, but the invisible passengers carried upon it, or lurking on surfaces, or within the very bodies of the sick. Could you feel the dizzying shift in perception from a vague, atmospheric dread to the concrete, albeit microscopic, reality of organisms too small to see with the naked eye? The very air, once thought to be polluted by a malevolent odor, was revealed to be a vast, invisible highway for these unseen travelers, these minuscule architects of both life and disease, capable of wreaking havoc on the grandest of scales. And so, the journey continued, from the intuitive, fearful protection of the plague doctor's mask to the rigorous, empirical science of microbiology. The very disease that had spawned the bird-like guardian, the Black Death, eventually surrendered its ultimate secret, centuries after the masked figures walked the streets. Scientists, armed with these new eyes, the powerful microscopes, and with patient, methodical inquiry, identified the true culprit, a tiny, rod-shaped bacterium, Yersinia pestis. It was carried not by miasma, but by fleas, those minute, jumping creatures themselves hitchhiking on rats, scurrying through the shadows of human habitation. What if the plague doctor, in their desperate attempt to filter the air, was unknowingly closer to a profound truth they could never fully grasp, protecting themselves from some airborne particulate, even if not the full, intricate story of transmission? This profound understanding transformed humanity's entire defense strategy. No longer were remedies based on humors or whispered prayers alone, but on a growing, evidence-based knowledge of these invisible enemies. The modern hospital, with its sterile operating rooms, the vaccine that protects millions from unseen threats, the antibiotic that vanquishes bacterial infections, these are all direct descendants of that initial wondrous glimpse into the microscopic world and the relentless pursuit of understanding that followed. In the plague doctor's peculiar, almost folkloric mask, it evolved too. From its humble origins of leather and herbs, it became the sophisticated respirators of today, the precise surgical masks worn in operating theaters, the full-body hazmat suits for confronting the most dangerous of pathogens. What if the very spirit of that original mask, the deep human will to create a barrier against the unseen, to protect and to serve in the face of an invisible, terrifying threat, still resonates in the quiet, focused eyes of a modern medical professional, peering through their own advanced protective shield, a silent echo across the centuries? For the journey never truly ends. New, unseen enemies emerge, always challenging our understanding, our resilience, our very way of life. The story of humanity is, in many ways, a continuous dialogue with the invisible. But each time, humanity draws upon that deep well of memory, the hard-won lessons learned from past plagues, the quiet courage of those who face the unknown with rudimentary tools, the relentless drive to observe, to question, to innovate. And as the quiet hum of our modern world settles into the deep embrace of night, it's worth remembering that the dance with the unseen, the continuous dialogue with the invisible, never truly ceases. The specific threats may change, the names of the maladies may evolve, and our tools for understanding them may grow infinitely more sophisticated. But the fundamental human experience of confronting the unknown, of seeking protection, and of striving to heal remains a timeless thread woven through the tapestry of our existence. The mask itself, that iconic, enigmatic symbol, has embarked on its own profound journey through history. From its origins as a crude, herb-filled filter against imagined miasma, it has evolved into the precise, scientifically engineered respirators of our hospitals, the sterile surgical masks worn in operating theaters, the advanced hazmat suits that shield our most dedicated professionals from unseen dangers. What if the very spirit of that original mask, the deep human will to create a barrier against the unseen, to protect and to serve in the face of an invisible, terrifying threat, still resonates in the quiet, focused eyes of a modern medical professional, peering through their own advanced protective shield? It is the same primal gesture of defiance, refined by centuries of hard-won knowledge. Imagine, as you lie here, safe and warm, how the memory of the plague doctor, with their strange, bird-like mask, continues to resonate in the deepest chambers of our collective consciousness. They are more than just a historical curiosity. They are an archetype, a potent symbol of humanity's persistent struggle against the invisible. What if, in their very strangeness, they remind us that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in the clash of swords, but in the quiet, determined act of confronting an unseen foe, armed with little more than a fragile hope and a peculiar disguise. Their image, etched into the very fabric of our imagination, holds a mirror to our own vulnerabilities, even in this modern age. For while we have illuminated so many of the shadows that once terrified our ancestors, the dance with the unseen, the continuous dialogue with the invisible, never truly ceases. New challenges emerge, new mysteries unfold, reminding us that knowledge is a journey, not a destination. And with each new unfolding, we reach back, perhaps unconsciously, to the lessons learned in those quiet, desperate times. The importance of vigilance, the necessity of community, the relentless pursuit of understanding, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Could it be that the very memory of the plague, of those silent, masked figures, instills in us a deeper respect for the delicate balance of life and a renewed commitment to safeguarding it? The quiet hum of our own slumbering world, with its advancements and its comforts, still carries the faint, almost imperceptible echo of that ancient struggle. The fears of our ancestors, the desperate measures they took, the slow dawning of scientific enlightenment, all these are threads that connect us across time. This story, whispered across the centuries, reminds us that while the specific threats may change, the fundamental human spirit of perseverance, of compassion, and of the unyielding quest for knowledge remains our most powerful, most enduring defense. It is a story not just of a forgotten era, but of the very essence of what it means to be human, facing the shadows with both fear and hope, continually learning, continually evolving. It teaches us that even in our darkest moments, there lies the potential for growth, for a deeper understanding, for new beginnings. The plague, in its brutal sweep, cleared paths for social change, for intellectual awakening, for a renewed appreciation of life's precious brevity. It was a terrible crucible, but from its fires emerged a stronger, more questioning, more resilient humanity. As you drift deeper into the soft embrace of sleep, know that this journey of understanding, this quiet struggle against the unseen, continue. It is a testament to the enduring human spirit, a legacy of courage passed down through generations. Rest now, knowing that even in the quietest corners of history and in the bustling laboratories of today, there are always those who watch, who strive, who seek to understand, and who protect the delicate spark of life. Let the final images of this tale gently dissolve in your mind. The soft, morning light, stretching across medieval hills, the vibrant colors of a blossoming renaissance, the silent, watchful presence of a figure cloaked in mystery, their peculiar mask, a timeless symbol of both dread and unwavering resolve, and the quiet, persistent glow of human ingenuity, illuminating the path forward through every darkness. May your dreams be filled with the quiet wonder of history, with the gentle strength of those who came before, and with the peaceful assurance that even in the face of the unknown, humanity's spirit of hope and discovery shines ever bright. Sweet dreams, sleepy traveler. May your slumber be deep and peaceful, as the stars continue their silent, eternal watch above us all.